This is the wrong sharing tray. I see. Okay, can you see the presentation, Neil?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay, I think it's time to start. Whoever joined later, welcome. Welcome to our Build Our Own API workshop. This is kind of an extension from a previous workshop that has been given last week. It's going to be more hands-on. I'm going to just introduce a couple of concepts that are going to be useful to us in building our own very simple API. Oh, whoops. Yep. And so check in via the link. And if you want to follow the tutorial that I'm going to give you, feel free. I'm going to ask. I'm going to answer any questions that you guys have. So this is the overview. We're going to go over some things in theory. Some of them are reminder from the previous week, and some of them are new, more specific to our tutorial. So we're going to start with what is an API, what is a REST API. We're going to go some HTTP concepts and networking. I'm going to show you some examples of calling a REST API and how it works, the responses as well. And then we're going to proceed. We're going to spend like 10 to 20 minutes developing our own API using Python. And I'll see if you guys have any questions. So what is an API? Just like you may have heard last week, API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is designed to make some work easier and provide services to customers. So basically, it is a set of rules between an application and the users of the service. It's used for various purposes and services. For example, when you visit a web page, for example, you might be using an API because this API can serve web pages. Or if you look to the right, you see a YouTube search. YouTube search can also be implemented as an API. So for example, every time you type a character, it sends a request to the server and says, hey, can you give me results for this search? And it returns results. And as I said, it might have been mentioned before, it follows the request response workflow. So a client sends a request, just like a YouTube search. And then the server, which is in this case, the Google's data centers, they send the response back. Important concept to realize about APIs is they provide some sort of an abstraction. Abstraction is the process of considering something independently of its associations, attributes, or concrete accompaniments. So you can think about this as a gas and brake pedal of a car. So for example, you press a gas pedal on a car and the car moves. You don't know how the car does this. You don't know how the engine works. You don't know how much fuel it spends. You just press a pedal and it goes. That's basically how API works. So you want to achieve some kind of functionality and it offers it to you without bothering you with the details of implementation. So as someone might have seen before, these are the two examples of APIs. So for example, to the left, you can see the example of a Google Maps API, specifically the API for speed limits. So for example, you see that there's, in the URL, you can see there's googleapis.com/speed limits. And then you have sort of list of parameters, and you have your API key for authentication. And this API, for example, will return some speed limits for a specific location that you will address in the search. On the right, for example, you can see a different kind of API. So if the first one was a web-based REST API, as we might say, the other one is just an application API, which is from a Keras machine learning library. For example, this API offers a function called compile. And the compile, as stated in this documentation, the compile method configures the model for training. So for example, again, just like I said with the pedal example, You call a function compile, and on the back end, it performs all the hard work and it returns you the configured model. Now let's talk about a little bit about REST APIs and what they are. So what is a REST API? REST API stands for Representational State Transfer, and it is basically a style for distributed hypermedia systems. And what it means is that it's just systems that exchange content, and content could be web pages, files, images, videos. It could be absolutely anything. And so REST APIs, as a set of rules, have 6 guiding principles. They're client-server based, they're stateless, cacheable, uniform interface, layered, and code on demand is an optional attribute that REST API have. Important concepts about REST APIs are resources, HTTP methods, and JSON data format, which we're going to talk about later. If you guys have any questions about that too, feel free to drop the questions in the chat. So what are the resources in REST APIs? Resource is a key abstraction in REST APIs, and resource could be anything from a file, from a document, image, video. It could be just a simple response of what you need. So for example, in our API that I mentioned before, the speed limits API, you see that the response in this case is, the response in this case is an object, just data. And this data has the speed limits for all the locations that you have asked the API to return you to. So for example, if we ask for this place, which has this ID, it will return us 105 speed limit, and it will also provide us with units. This format of data is called JSON format. I see the question in the chat. Are database compression solutions or integration a part of an API or a specific API themselves? It depends on your implementation. So you could implement your own API and use your own database as a part of this API, or you could call some kind of different API that offers a better solution. So for example, I could develop my own database and use it in my API, and that would be a part of my API. Or I could use a Firebase, which is Google-based database, and that will be a different kind of API. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so feel free to drop in. I see all the questions in the chat. So a quick note about JSON. If you see before that, there was an example of the data representation, and this is how JSON looks like. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a lightweight format for storing and transporting data, often used when data is sent from a server to a web page, just like I was saying earlier about the Google API. It is self-describing and easy to understand. So as you can see, there's an example below. You have an object employees, and each employee has a first name and the value for it. So it's just a key value pair, key value. So first name Anna, first name Peter, last name Smith, last name Jones. So this is basically the structure. So the same here, you have a speed limits object, which is a collection of elements, or as we might say, array. And each of those elements in the array has their own attributes. I see a question in chat saying, kind of like collections on MongoDB. You mean connections or collections? Mayank, was that a typo, or did you mean collections? Oh, well, yeah, you could use also MongoDB for API connections in your own project as well. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is this is the image taken from the JSON website, and this is basically a diagram that explains how JSON is formed and how to read it, basically. So you have the opening bracket, You have the white space, you have a string, and then you just have a string column value, so key value pairs. Okay, let's talk about HTTP requests and networking concepts. We're going to look at specifically two kinds of HTTP requests, which are GET and POST, and we'll implement them later in the API. HTTP requests. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Hypertext is basically a more rich version of text. So for example, web pages are hypertext. HTTP is an application layer protocol for transmitting hypermedia documents, such as HTML, yes. Application layer means that there is a lot of layers going when two entities communicate between each other on the network, and HTTP is the application layer. HTTP was designed for communication between web servers and web browsers, but can also be used for other purposes. Just like we said before, we can implement our own application, and this application can issue HTTP requests. So for example, in this diagram to the right, you can see the two kinds of requests, GET and POST, and you can see the difference between those. So you see that GET request, when it comes from the client, it's just request only via this URL. When we have POST request, it is different by the fact that there is a payload associated with that request. This is not the only difference, but this is kind of the main difference. Again, just to highlight the difference between GET and POST requests, you see that this is the representation of how an actual request looks like. So a request consists of the method, which is either GET or a POST. It has all the information that the server needs to understand it. So it has the URL, it has the protocol, it has the user agent, host, and has many other fields for the request to be understandable. And so, for example, in POST, you see a difference. There is a content length field, which is equal to the amount of bytes there is in the body. And this is the body of the request. So it has name equals blah, and type equals 1. Every time you send a request, to explain this graphic, every time you send a request, there will be a response from the request. And response usually contains the response code. So response codes are ranging from 200 to 500. 200 is okay. 400 is a problem on the side of the client. So for example, either the resource was not found, or for example, you don't have the permissions to access it, which is 403. And 404, you've always seen a 404 error when you're accessing a web page. There's also 500, where that means that the server just broke and there is an error that somebody has to fix. Okay, so example of calling an API, talking about GET and POST requests and REST APIs. Calling a REST API can be performed in a variety of ways. So for example, as I said before that, just visiting a web page in the browser can initiate a call to the REST API, because your browser acts as a most common way to perform an HTTP request. It can also be accessed using command line in different operating systems. And one of the tools to call an API or issue an HTTP request would be curl, and we will look into that, and we will use that today. As well as we can use that, we call the REST API using some kind of programming languages. So for example, today we're going to be using Python, and just like someone asked before, we can call REST APIs like MongoDB and Google using programming languages as well. So this is the basic diagram that you've seen before. You have a client side, client issues a request to server understands the request, and then sends the response. So for example, this is the code to call an API in Python. So for example, if we hold on. Yeah. So if we copy this code into our file, for example, let's open Visual Code. Yeah. If we create a Python, yeah, by the way, if you can't see, that might be a little bit small. If you can't see, let me know. New file, we call request example UI. So we have our Python file. We will use the code that is in the presentation. Oh no, whoops. No, I'm sorry. Okay, so we have this code and we import this library. This module called request imports the request module. I see a hand from Mayank. Feel free to.
The font is too small. We can't see.
Yeah, I see. Okay. What about that?
Yeah, that works.
That bad? Okay.
Yeah.
So we can see that I wrote some code to perform an API request. We see two functions. The first function is called get Spotify API, and the other is called get HTML. So these two functions, I mean, it's better for me to just admit it's fine. We can look into two different kinds of requests. So for example, two different kinds of APIs. So for example, this function, get HTML, just accesses the website called google.com, and it basically returns the status code of the request and prints the content. So let's see how it executes. Hold on a second. This is so weird. Why does that? Okay. Let's see if we can open a terminal. Oops. Terminal, new terminal. Okay. So we open a new terminal to run the Python script. It's so small. Mayank asks. Request example. Oh, it didn't print anything. Hold on. Hello world. Wait, hold on. Whoa, this is very weird. Is that, why does that not execute? Python 3 is not found. But just print hello world. This is bizarre. I apologize for that. I'm not sure. The question in the chat, which is the best way and the easiest language to get along with APIs? The easiest language is Python, and I can go over the code to tell you exactly what it does. And it just, for some reason, it doesn't run the way I want it to. This is very, very interesting. Let's see. Can I open it in the terminal? Hold on, guys. I'm doing a little bit. No problem. So we have our I see. Okay, hold on. Yeah, for some reason it runs Python 3 instead of Python 2 instead of Python 3. Let me troubleshoot that for a second. Maybe I have to install the. Just a second, guys. Okay, I see. Okay, give me 1 second. For some reason, I'm using a different computer usually for my own development. So for some reason, Macs have, well, I know what's the reason, but it has a different. Oh. Oh, oops. We'll go. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, there's so many problems with that. I would say Mac is more preferable, but because Mac is more of a Linux-like platform, and both Mac and Linux are preferable for developing. Yeah. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay, I think I installed it. Command not found. Wow, this is very sad. Okay, it installs Brew. If you are still wondering about the operating system, if you're a computer science student and are serious about going into development, you can install this operating system called Ubuntu. You can also download this as a virtual machine and then see if you're comfortable with it. Because that's what I did, and this is the best kind of experience that you might have. Okay, is downloading the tools. Yeah, I agree, Robert. If you don't have any apps that you're stuck with on Windows, I would definitely advise you to try new kind of operating systems. Sorry, guys. Second time on Mac. Forgot about that. So I could go over real quick why it installs. I could tell you what this code does. It's still installing. So if you've been familiar with any other kind of languages, you can see that the code is structured in functions, procedures, and each function is self-contained and performs some kind of a functionality within it. So when I call get HTML, the code here is executed. And when I call get Spotify API, the code here is executed. So for example, here, I assign a string HTML URL google.com, and then I use this URL to send a request. And the way I do this is that I call the module requests, and within this module, there's a function get that performs the get request from HTTP that we talked about earlier. We provide it with the URL, and it returns us the response from the request. That's maybe even better to call response. And we see that as soon as I got the response from the request, I print out the status code and I print out the content. That's basically it. That's all the magic that happens there. That takes a while. Okay, it's thinking. So here, for example, I said the get Spotify API function acts a little bit different than this one. So for example, it has the different API URL endpoint. So for example, Spotify, the music service, has its own API for getting artists, getting music, getting some other kind of functionality that they offer, because they're very proficient in stuff like machine learning, and they offer it to the public. So for example, we see that this API, api.spotify.com, is for artists. So we see artists, we see the ID, and we see /albums. And then with this URL, I then set up parameters for my URL, and I say that I want to get a single album type. I want to get offset 20 and limit 10. These are the parameters that are in Spotify documentation, and that's what they require to specify every time you send a request. So then I do the same thing I do here. I call the request module, I call the get function, I provide the URL, and I provide the parameters, and I get the response. And then from the response, I get the data in the JSON format by calling the JSON function. Still installing, huh? Okay. And so what happens here is basically after I finished those two functions, I just call them here. That's it. Okay. Well, the other way we could call the API, for example, if Python is still not running, I can show you the other way using curl. So, for example, if we go back to our presentation, and we'll go a little bit further than that. We see the curl command. And curl is basically, let's go back. Curl is a networking tool. So it's it's able to send a lot of different kinds of requests. And so all we can do, for example, if we open the terminal, here, this is our terminal, and we will expand it a little bit so you can see. We say curl, and we see that the curl is installed, and it says this is invalid command. So we'll just say curl https google.com, and we see that it returned us some response. We see that it returned us the HTML document, and it basically says the document has moved, which corresponds to the 301 response. So that's basically the same thing as this function is doing. It sends a GET request, and curl sends back the GET request just by specifying the website. Let's see if the Python thing is installed. Let's see. Still installing. That's very, very big for some reason. I'm really confused. Okay. So to develop, we have 30 minutes left. So I'll just try to quickly go over the prerequisites for developing your own API. So basically what we'll need is a Python programming language. We'll need Flask, which is a Python web framework, because we'll be working with a little bit of web page development. We will work with JSON, and we will use curl networking tool to debug our API. We can also send requests to that too. Okay. Command M. Whoa, thank you. That's very useful. I really appreciate that. Okay. Still installing. Okay. Well, while that is installing, we can write our own API in a way that you would write some other kind of API for personal purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file called api.py. This is a directory. I was just joking. Let's delete the directory and let's add a new file. We'll call it api.py. So we have a new Python file, and we'll begin by importing some modules that we will need during our development. So we'll need Flask, and Flask is a web framework for Python. It will be just easy to develop websites with Python in the backend. And the way we'll start using it, we'll create an app object that uses Flask with name API, because our file is called api.py. And then what we'll do is we'll create a homepage for our API and this web page is going to be routed to the index method. And the way it routes itself to the index method is by using the app.route directive. We'll say /home, and we'll say that it accepts methods, and we'll accept an array, and we'll say get. So we wrote the directory that routes the /home website. Well, I'll show you later. It routes the /home URL to the index method. And what we'll do, we'll just say, here's a simple web page that it will return. We'll say, header, hello from our new API, and we'll close it. And we'll just return it. So basically, what we did is we created a simple page that says "Hello World," hello from our new API, and it just returns it every time we access /home URL, which is equivalent to a GET request. The question in the chat: is the platform you're using an IDE or specifically for APIs? It's just a simple code editor, so it's not an IDE, but it's just a tool for opening code files and writing them. I don't know if there's specifically a platform for APIs, because all you do is just to write code and then run it. So you can use an IDE, you can use a text editor, you can write your code anywhere. It's just a matter of preference. Oh no. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, it installed. Real install Python. Okay, it's thinking. It's thinking. Updating Homebrew. Yeah, Visual Studio Code is very cool. It's very powerful, and some of the plugins allow it to be functioning like a actual IDE that you would run code in. Does that make sense about this code so far? It's a very simple function that basically demonstrates everything we'll do in the next 20 minutes. Okay, so now you can see that it installs Python 3. Just to clarify about IDEs, for example, the PyCharm IDE that I see in the chat is specifically designed for Python, and Visual Studio, on the other hand, is designed mostly for Microsoft or Windows development. So it has all the functionalities you need for Python, but PyCharm, for example, has debugging tools, has all the highlighting, etc. It's just more Python specific. If you want to choose an IDE for Python development, it could be wise to stick with PyCharm. I could also advise you, depending on where you want to be in computer science, you could also be just choose a code editor and do most of the work in command line, because you're going to be using command line, which is this little window here. You're going to be using command line a lot in your career. Okay, let's check if Python 3 is installed. Yes, Python 3 is installed indeed. Now we can finally start running functions. Okay, so we have this little function here, and the way we run Flask is we just say Python 3 app API.py, and it doesn't return anything. Hold on. Let's run the terminal. Python 3. Okay. Well, I know for sure for a fact that Flask is not installed, so let's install Flask. Hold on. I just realized that we don't have a lot of things set up for this kind of development on a Mac. Okay. Hold on a second. Troubleshooting continues. Let's install pip. Yeah, see, it installs the utility also using curl. So we'll just go in our terminal and enter this command. Okay. Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Maybe pip 3. It actually works. Okay. Never mind. Okay. Let's see if it installs like that. Whoops. Okay. It's thinking. Or is it waiting for me? Apologize, guys. Oh, it does install Flask. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. It did install Flask. Okay. And now let's see if it runs. It doesn't, because I didn't call. Did I call anything? Because I didn't run the function. Okay. To run the function to run Flask, you have to call Flask first. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to declare the main function. And then all we're going to do is apt run host, local host. And we're going to run it on port 8080, which is the standard port for HTTP. Going to save it. And we're going to run it. There we go. If we go to the localhost website, well, I did not mean to do that. Okay, hold on. Let's see. So for example, if we go on localhost 8080 and we go on the, so for example, we declared home to be our, yes. And this is API development for you. This is how we're gonna do it. So what happened is that we went onto the home route and routed this to our function. Let's just develop a simple API. So for example, we can develop an API for the Google Developers Club events, and we can call the API and it will return us the list of events. So for example, we could say on index, we'll type something, not just hello API. In Jupyter, the same way you install, just like you install packages, you just install package Flask. I'm not sure, try including it and see what kind of error it gives, but you should be able to just install a package in Python and it should work. Does that make sense? It also depends on what kind of operating system you are. If you still have problems, Christopher, let me know. So for example, for index.html, we can declare a simple web page that will say, creating your own API workshop. And we'll say, this is a tiny documentation for our API. And we'll say, let's declare a list, and we'll say main page get home returns the home page. And another list item, LI stands for list item, list events. Get events, return list of events that DSC offers. And then we'll close the list item and we'll say body. And we'll just return this page. Let's see. If we close this, okay. So if we load our, this is like a mini server. If we say Python 3 API, we're running a new page. So for example, if we open Chrome again, and we'll reload our page. This says now creating your own API workshop. And it says this is tiny documentation for our API. We have a main page, and when we send a get request to /home, it returns the home page. And this is how we did it. And the other endpoint, all the API access points that are visible to public are called endpoints. And the second endpoint will be for listing all the events. It will be get/events, and will return the list of all events that DSC offers. So for this purpose, we're gonna end our debugging sessions. For this purpose, we're gonna declare another function, list events. It doesn't accept anything and returns string. For that to be routed, we have to declare app route. We're calling that on /events route, and we have methods equal to get, just like the last time we have. So right now, every time you'll send a post request, get request to the /events route, it will call this function. So I'll just quickly design this function. But for that, we need a quick event object. And the way we declare that in Python, we call class event, and we'll have a simple constructor. Constructor is what is called every time you create a new object. Name, date, description, and number of people attending. And it will return nothing so far. Self name, self date, self description, self known people, number of people. So this is our quick object that will describe an event that we're gonna pull from our code. And the way we do it, and to be fair, this is a very simple demo, and usually you would have a database for this kind of thing. But for now, the way we're gonna store events, we're just gonna declare a variable that will have all the events in it. And the way we do it is we'll declare an object called events, and it's gonna be an array because it has the square brackets. I'm gonna say event API workshop. And it's gonna be on 10 8/2020. Oops. And description is going to build your own API. And it's going to be 100 people attending. Let's get optimistic here. And the second event, for example, we have quick labs experience. It's going to be on 10/15/2020. Learn machine learning. There's going to be 30 people attending. So we have our mini database, which is just a simple object with 2 events in it. And each event has name, date, and a description and number of people attending. So the way we do it in the list events is very simple. We just say get our events from the DB, for example, and we say global events to be able to use that object that we just created. And now what we're going to do with this object is going to say create a page, events page equals. It will say you will find a list of current events below. And we'll just put a dot here and close our header tag. And then to be able to format this pretty on the web page, for example, we'll open a list tag. And for each event in the list of events, we're just going to append it to our page because our page is just a string. We'll say li strong. Strong is used to bolden the event the name. We'll say event name plus we're going to close the strong tag. I'm going to say event. Oh, forgot the space. Event description and add a space. Event date. And we're going to say, just to attract everyone, we'll say event num people people attending. And this is going to be our events page. We're just going to close it with list closing tag and with closing body tag. And we're just going to return our page. Wow. Okay. Now we're going to save this file, see if we have any mistakes, and then try to run it. Okay, it says invalid syntax. I think I know why, because we forgot a comma here. Let's try again. Okay, so now if we go on our page and refresh, we still see, when we go to the home address, we'll still see our little documentation here. But if we go to the events, we see that we have a list of our events here. You will find the list of current events below. You see the API workshop, and you see the Quick Labs experience. Does that make sense to everyone who followed? We just created a simple endpoint that pulls the events from an imaginary database and just list it on a web page for everyone to see. So yeah, basically that's a very, very simple one endpoint API that we just built in 10 minutes. We have a simple event class that describes the events. We have our imaginary database that serves as a simple object in Python. Ideally, you will have your separate connection for the API. And it's just not good to have global variables in the code. Then we created one endpoint for the home page, and we created the second endpoint for the list events page. And this is just one very simple function for get methods. You can also create a function for post methods that will change the events. So for example, some kind of other endpoint, for example, events, the same endpoint, but it will serve a different method post. It will call the function add event. And then every time you'll go on the events and you will post your own data to the server, it will append a new event and it will update the database. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do that, but if you really like this workshop, we're probably going to serve another one, ideally without all these difficulties that I've had with Mac operating system. But yeah, do you have any questions that you want to ask about this little API that we just built? We have /home, and it has a simple web page that it serves to us. We also have the events that it also builds for us and lists properly. Yeah, no problem, Robert. I'm sorry for all this mess that I had with the terminal, but we built a little something, and I hope that made sense to you. We also plan to host a third API workshop, but we'll see if people want it. Feel free to, you can message me in Teams if you want and ask me any questions about APIs. I myself built an API for one of my jobs, and I have some knowledge in that, some experience in that. So if you have any questions, if you want to see that in a project, actually, if you know about the Google Challenges program, challenge program, then you can develop your own project in the form of an API. So for example, if you develop some kind of a solution for COVID or that solves some other problem with using machine learning, using computer vision, using anything, you can develop that in a list of in a way that resembles API. Mayank asks, so events is a list of objects? Yes, event is a list of objects, because you see we have a class here, class event, that defines the event object, and we just created two events using this class, and these are objects. Yes, in Python everything is an object, so that's pretty simple to remember. I guess that's it, guys. If you have any questions, you can feel free to stay and ask us some questions, but that's it for the workshop. Sure. Don't forget to check in if you haven't already. Any other questions before you go? I can answer anything, not just about this workshop. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask.
Hello, Alexander. I'm Varenya.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm a freshman I'm a freshman majoring in computer science, and I'm an international student. So like, would just like to
Mm-hmm.
ask you like, from where should I start like getting into programming and all? Because I know like basics of Python, but like, what
Mm-hmm.
you will suggest, like, from where should I start getting deep into it?
So you want to learn more programming? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like the programming and APIs. Like, I'm interested in APIs and all. So how could I
Mm-hmm.
get over?
Well, so that's a good thing that you attend such workshops as Google workshop. They offer, well, I tried to offer as much information as I could. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to offer everything I had, but it is very great, very good that you're involved. But try to think about a project that you could make on your own, and just start doing it. Just open Visual Studio, Visual Code, like I did, and just start writing some functions. Just write something that maybe will help someone. So, for example, if you want to be more productive, or you want to write your own calendar, or you want to write your own something, just just start it. Just allocate some time during the week and start googling stuff. Stop. Look, did you see how I was installing Python on the Mac? I just started googling stuff, and then until I found a
Yeah,
solution. So this is the only way that you will learn more than any other person. Just start doing that. It's hard. It's sometimes hard to find an idea for a good project, but don't start with a startup that nobody has ever done, because that's difficult unless you already have an idea. But if you don't, just try to build something. If you like some kind of a product, let's say I like Gmail or I like YouTube, then try to build your own version of YouTube. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take a while, maybe like a month or 2 or 3, but you're going to learn a lot. And if you're actually going to build something like that in your freshman year, you're probably going to be you're going to know everything that is going to be taught to you in classes in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's very cool. Did that answer your question?
yeah. Thanks for that. Like,
Also,
it's a
very important. I forgot to mention to you, but it's very important to practice coding websites such as LeetCode and HackerRank. Have you heard about those?
Yeah, I've heard about like HackerRank, but haven't heard about the other one. Can you please like type that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll type. I actually know 3 websites.
Okay,
Uh,
so because like I need somewhere to practice my coding, because like getting information isn't enough. So like,
yeah.
would these websites help me?
Hmm?
Like, would these websites help me to like practice my skills and gain some like practical
Well,
application skills?
yeah, these websites only help you with programming in general. So solving problems and language specific knowledge, they help you. But for example,
Yeah.
building an API or building a website, you will not learn it any other way except building that for yourself. So start with HackerRank, start with some kind of Python language or C language, choose some kind of a language, and then practice as much as you can. And then when you think you're ready, or you can start now, it's up to you. You should start building something. You should find out the project, maybe ask your friends if they want to help you build the project, and just start learning, because this is the only way.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Come back for more workshops.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure. Like,
Tori.
I have attended every meeting of like DSC. So like, it's a
Okay,
great club to engage with.
okay. Glad to
Yeah.
hear. Dory, I think we should stop the recording. Okay, I think it's yeah. Mayank, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
So like I know like in machine learning